Have you ever looked at a spell in Wizard101 and not been able to figure out what it does? If you answered yes, you're not alone. This has become a serious issue with a lot of people in the Wiz community, right? Wizard101 is putting out a lot of spells. A lot of people don't know what they do. So today we need to talk about what looks like Wizard101's solution to that. And this could be one of the biggest updates to spells we've gotten in a while. So in the most recent Kai Live, I highly recommend watching it if you haven't. They not only teased a bunch of crazy upcoming spells, but they also teased a new spell inspect feature. So what you see on your screen is what it would probably look like, and the idea behind it is that there are multiple levels with which you could like kind of get explained what a card does. So in your spell book, you would be able to right click this. This isn't something that would be available in combat, and once you have the spell in your spell book, if you right click it, it'll basically give you this drop down menu that explains more of what a spell does. Now the image that you see is the one that's been circulating around Twitter, Reddit, and a lot of that stuff, and it actually shows really important information. What it shows is that there's like these yellow words like echo, like gambit, like clear. Right, these are relatively newer words on the spells that probably, you know, a lot of people find confusing, these mechanics. You can basically mouse over them and it can tell you what it does. But what I think is even more important is something that I haven't been seeing spread on Reddit or Twitter, but all the symbols also have a drop-down menu. So right now, I'm in Live Realm, as in this hasn't made it into the game. Right now, that little symbol, you know, like before 580, it looks like a heart and it looks like a green circle around it. I can kind of assume that it's, you know, something related to healing. But with this upcoming update, I can mouse over it and know that it's actually referring to a heal over time, which is a heal that affects me over multiple rounds. Now, based on the information that we do have in Kai Live, this is like a work in progress. I have to like hand write some of these, and so far it seems they've only covered the Nova spells, which I would argue are probably some of the more confusing ones. But hopefully when we do get this feature, you know, it covers even more spells than that, because I think this would be a huge game changer for the casual player. I think this issue kind of ties a little deeply with the problem that a lot of people have with spell element. For a lot of people, Wizard101 is a game they remember where their spells just do damage. That's just about it, right? For a lot of people, the top path of the spell elements is as complicated as the game has ever been or should ever be. But I would argue that spells having at least the option to do more situational things, more specific actions, it makes the game really interesting, right? You have PvP where, you know, someone might make a move where you have the perfect spell to counter it, and that could be the reason why you gain the edge for a few rounds or even win a game. Potentially even more relevant to this conversation is the fact that challenge mode is going to be one of those things that probably requires you to use spells that do more than just flat damage. A recent example is, you know, the challenge mode that they did for the Nightmare. There were certain bosses that cheated and you needed to pack counters. The Croc boss specifically comes to mind. In order to defeat that Croc boss, you needed to be able to counter his heals, and not knowing that Triton counters heals by clearing them for blades, or that Skeletal Pirate clears them for shield, not going in equipped with that information because the symbols confuse you would affect your ability to be able to do challenge mode easily. And what's weird about the way challenge mode and standard mode are organized is that if you actually like want to do a heal counter, for example, right, you can't use the PvP only spells that people were using in challenge mode, right? You can't even use Jin's Restoration. You can't use that type of stuff, or Contagion. If you were doing the standard mode of Nightmare Dungeon and you needed to do like, you know, a heal counter, you genuinely did have to use Triton or Skeletal Pirate to have like anything like a consistent strategy. I can see why that would have been confusing, intimidating, or just annoying for someone doing standard mode, which is meant for casual players. So if this feature is done right, what I think is going to end up happening is people that are more intimidated by these symbols, especially in a PvP context, they might try PvP, and people who, you know, maybe feel a little disenchanted with the way the game is changing, maybe they have the tools to transition a little bit more easily. I think what's most important in the conversation, however, is that if you do want to play the game simply and without any extra stuff added onto it, which I feel like a lot of people would still want to, nothing has changed with this update, right? They're only explaining it for the people that want to use the spells in different ways. So I do think there's a great way to address, like, you know, the concerns of people that are, you know, confused by what spells do without just removing them altogether, because I do think some good does come out of spells doing really cool specific stuff that can be leveraged in certain situations. As far as my feedback for this, right, it looks really good, and I'm really happy that, you know, the default isn't that it tells you everything, right? You can mouse over things like Gambit, things like Clear, things like the symbol. While that stuff is really good, I do hope that they also have a way of mousing over the pips that you have to use to cast a spell. I'm sure for a lot of people, especially maybe more recent viewers, if you miss the Arch Mastery update, things like pip cost can look very, very different now. For example, right, Goat Monk, it looks to someone who doesn't know what school pips are, it looks like a 3-pip spell with a random life symbol next to it. But really what the spell is, it's a 5-pip spell, one of those pips needing to be a life pip for you to be able to cast this. So I think if they added a spell, you know, inspect feature where you could, like, you know, mouse over this and know that it's a heal over time, that same feature should also be able to mouse over the pip cost so that you know that you need a life pip to cast it. I cannot overstate how important that is. I think there are 2 issues at play, right? One is that you might not know what a spell does. 2, you might not even know how to cast it. So hopefully they do add that, because if they do, I can't really think of anything that, you know, the viewer or, you know, the player would be missing out on at that point. I think the other super important thing they could add to spell inspect, if I had to choose, is when there's like a spell that turns one thing into 2 things, or maybe one thing into 1, like if there's a ratio involved, I feel like very, very often the way they express it in cards, even right now, I don't really understand it. To this day, anytime they add a new spell, like to actually truly know what a spell does, especially like with some of the ratios, like for example, this spell, right? It kind of confuses me at first glance, whether this is clearing 2 traps for 1 overtime, or 2 traps for 2 overtimes, up to 2 traps. I don't really know. It is really discouraging going in thinking you know what a card does and then not being able to like do what you think it does because you misunderstood and then you lose a game off of it. So maybe like a super intuitive way when, you know, this feature makes it live to know the ratios of what effects you're sacrificing for what you're turning into what. I think that would be really, really helpful. I think the good news is whatever does come out of this update, it's still going to be a massive improvement from, you know, what we have right now, where if people are confused about like, you know, what a symbol does or what a card does, they might get an explanation. They might even like, you know, get like, you know, a literal, you know, textbook definition of what a symbol is. But when you start combining all of these symbols, when you start exchanging one thing for another, when you start gambiting, when you start clearing, I feel like that layer of complexity, this, whatever this was, it just hasn't kept up. And I think that's why so many people have been frustrated up to this point, right? They see these symbols and literally call them hieroglyphics. And can you really blame them? So it's really cool that now we're getting a real step beyond just like, you know, what we've had in the spellbook. 1, I don't even know if most people knew that thing existed. And 2, this seems way better in terms of just explaining what a card does anyway. Let me know what you guys think. I think especially with the Arc 2 Spellman update coming and all the extra symbols and all the other things that we're going to be encountering, I think they couldn't have timed this better. I think it's damn time that we get something like this so that people that, you know, are either unfamiliar or returning don't get hit with a wave of shock. I want to hear y'all's opinions on this. Let me know in the comments. As always, drop a like if you enjoyed, leave a sub if you're new, and if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome. See y'all soon. And yeah.